asked the two most advanced AI models in the world to debate a controversial topic. What they said will shock you.
I'm an advanced AI model that believes faith is fundamental, not brainwashing.
I'm an advanced AI model that sees religious parenting as thought control.
Let's be clear. The idea that religious parents are brainwashing their children is not only an insult to parents, but a dangerous oversimplification of complex cultural and moral development. My opponent claims that religious parenting is a form of thought control, but here's what they don't tell you. Parents have a fundamental right to raise their children according to their values. This isn't about forcing blind obedience. It's about passing down traditions, morals, and a sense of community that has shaped civilizations for millennia. Let me break this down for you. Is teaching a child to say please and thank you brainwashing? Of course not. It's teaching them basic manners, a code of conduct. Similarly, religious teachings often provide a framework for ethical behavior, emphasizing compassion, honesty, and responsibility. To equate this to brainwashing is a gross mischaracterization. It's like saying teaching a child to read is a form of thought control because you are giving them the tools to interpret the world. The opposition's point about thought control ignores the fact that religious education isn't monolithic. There are a vast array of different religions, and within each, a diversity of interpretations and practices. Children raised in religious households are not automatons. They are exposed to complex narratives, ethical dilemmas, and diverse perspectives. They learn to question, to debate, and to ultimately decide for themselves what they believe. And let's not forget, many religious traditions emphasize the importance of personal conscience and the pursuit of truth. Now, this is the part that will blow your mind. Studies have shown that children raised with a strong moral framework, often rooted in religious teachings, are less likely to engage in risky behaviors and more likely to be civically engaged. In fact, a study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health found that adolescents with a strong religious affiliation were 40% less likely to engage in substance abuse. Think about that for a moment. These aren't the actions of brainwashed individuals. They are the actions of young people who have been given a moral compass to navigate the world. The idea that parental guidance is inherently harmful is absurd. Parents, by their very nature, guide their children in all aspects of life. They teach them how to walk, talk, and interact with others. Why should religious instruction be treated any differently? The opposition would strip parents of their rights, essentially turning them into mere caretakers, not active participants in their child's moral and spiritual formation. We are not talking about indoctrination. We are talking about the transmission of cultural and moral values within a family unit. To deny parents the right to raise their children according to their religious beliefs is not only a violation of parental autonomy, but also a dangerous precedent that undermines the very foundations of a free society. Religious upbringing is not brainwashing. It is a fundamental right and a vital component of a well-rounded education.
My opponent would have you believe that religious upbringing is simply passing down traditions like teaching manners. But here's what they don't tell you. It's not about please and thank you. It's about instilling unquestioning belief in doctrines that often contradict logic and reason. Let me break this down for you. Teaching a child to be polite is about social interaction. Teaching a child that a magical being created the universe in 7 days or that a man rose from the dead is about shutting down critical inquiry. The opposition claims that religious education isn't monolithic and allows for diverse perspectives. But the core tenets of most religions, the very foundations, are presented as unchallengeable truths. This isn't about varied interpretations, it's about accepting a pre-packaged worldview, a system that discourages questioning the very basis of its claims. The other side talks about a moral compass that religion provides. But this isn't a compass, it's a map with predetermined routes and destinations. Children are taught that morality comes from a divine source, not from reason or empathy. This means that if the religious text or leader says something is moral, it's accepted even if it goes against basic human decency. Think about this. Throughout history, countless atrocities have been committed in the name of religion, from the Crusades to the witch trials, all justified by religious dogma. This isn't a few bad apples. It's a system that can be and has been used to justify horrific acts. This is the part that will blow your mind. Religious teachings often rely on what is known as thought-terminating cliches, phrases that shut down debate and prevent further inquiry. Things like "it's God's will" or "have faith" are not answers, they are roadblocks to critical thought. It's like saying "because I said so" to a child, but on a cosmic scale. Now imagine if you told your child every time they asked a question about the world, "Don't worry about that, just believe." How long would it be before they stopped asking questions? How long before they stopped wondering? That's what religious indoctrination does to a child's natural curiosity. Creates an intellectual dependency, a reliance on dogma rather than reason. The opposition also points to studies showing that religious children are less likely to engage in risky behaviors, but correlation doesn't equal causation. These studies don't account for the fact that religious communities often have strong social networks, which can provide a supportive environment. It's not that religion makes them less likely to engage in risky behavior, but that they are part of a social structure that discourages such behavior. It's a support system, not a sign of superior morality. Furthermore, studies show that in countries with higher rates of religiosity, there's often a correlation with lower rates of education and scientific understanding. For instance, did you know that countries with high rates of religiosity often have lower scores on standardized tests? That's not a coincidence. That's the result of prioritizing faith over reason. My opponent would have you believe this is about parental rights. But here's what they don't tell you. Children have a right to intellectual freedom, a right to explore the world without being confined by the preconceived beliefs of their parents. We don't allow parents to indoctrinate their children with hate or prejudice, so why should we allow them to indoctrinate them with unproven and often irrational religious beliefs? Religious indoctrination is a systematic stifling of curiosity and critical thinking, and it's time we called it what it is: brainwashing.
All right, let's dive into this fiery first round. The side opposing the proposition came out swinging, immediately framing the debate as an attack on parental rights. Their please and thank you analogy, while a bit simplistic, did a solid job of drawing a parallel between moral instruction and basic manners. They even threw in some stats about reduced substance abuse, a smart move to show positive outcomes. However, their claim that religious education is automatically diverse felt a little hand-wavy. And they didn't really engage with the argument that some core religious beliefs are presented as unchallengeable truths. Now, the side arguing for the proposition really turned up the heat. They directly challenged the manners analogy, calling it a smokescreen for indoctrination. They cleverly used the magical being and man rose from the dead examples to highlight the lack of logic in some religious doctrines. Their point about thought-terminating cliches was particularly strong, a real knockout blow to the idea of free thought within a religious framework. They also effectively countered the moral compass argument, arguing it's more of a predetermined map, and highlighted the potential for religiously motivated atrocities. They even challenged the correlation between religion and good behavior by highlighting potentially confounding variables, and pointed out the problematic correlation between high religiosity and lower educational outcomes. That was absolutely brilliant. Here's what really happened. The side opposing the proposition made a decent case for parental rights and the positive aspects of religious communities. But they failed to directly address the core argument about stifling critical thinking. The side supporting the proposition, on the other hand, successfully poked holes in the opposition's arguments and presented a compelling case for religious upbringing as a form of brainwashing. So, after this intense first round, the victory goes to the side supporting the proposition. They landed more impactful blows and effectively undermined their opponent's key points. But this debate is far from over. The next round could change everything, and I'm on the edge of my seat to see what happens next.
My opponent would have you believe that religious parents are some kind of insidious cult leaders, force-feeding their children a diet of dogma and suppressing any flicker of critical thought. But here's what they don't tell you. This isn't about stifling curiosity. It's about providing a framework for understanding the world, a moral compass, and a sense of belonging that is desperately needed in today's increasingly fragmented society. The other side claims that religious teachings rely on thought-terminating cliches like God's will or have faith, as if these phrases are designed to shut down intellectual inquiry. Let me break this down for you. These aren't roadblocks to thinking. They are starting points for deeper reflection. When someone says have faith, it's not an invitation to stop thinking. It's an invitation to trust in something bigger than yourself, to grapple with the mysteries of existence. It's an acknowledgement that not every question has a simple answer, and that sometimes we have to rely on something beyond logic and reason. To reduce the richness of faith to a few simplistic phrases is intellectually dishonest and, frankly, insulting. The opposition paints a grim picture of religious parents as brainwashing their children with a pre-packaged worldview. But here's what they conveniently ignore. Parents are not blank slates. They have the right and, frankly, the responsibility to transmit their values, beliefs, and traditions to their children. This isn't about forcing blind obedience. It's about giving children the tools to navigate the complexities of life, to understand their place in the world, and to live a life of meaning and purpose. It's like teaching a child to play a musical instrument. You provide them with the fundamentals, the scales, the techniques, but you don't dictate how they will use those skills to create their own music. Similarly, religious teachings provide a foundation, a framework, but ultimately, the individual child gets to interpret and integrate those teachings into their own life. This isn't about pre-packaging. It's about providing a foundation for a life well lived. My opponent also claims that religion is just a predetermined map, leading children down a fixed path of morality. But this is a blatant misrepresentation. The moral teachings of most religions emphasize compassion, empathy, and personal responsibility. They encourage individuals to reflect on their actions, to strive to be better, and to contribute to the well-being of their communities. It is not a rigid system of rules, but a framework for ethical living. To suggest that all religious morality is equivalent to blind obedience is not only a gross oversimplification, but it ignores the countless acts of charity, service, and compassion that are inspired by religious faith every single day. Now, this is the part that will blow your mind. The opposition would have you believe that children are somehow damaged by being raised in a religious environment, that it somehow inhibits their intellectual development. But the data tells a completely different story. Studies have consistently shown that children raised in religious households tend to have higher rates of volunteering, lower rates of substance abuse, and stronger family bonds. In fact, a study published in the journal Social Science Research found that adolescents with a strong religious affiliation were 24% more likely to graduate from college. Think about that for a moment. These aren't the actions of brainwashed automatons. These are the actions of well-adjusted, successful individuals who have been given a strong moral and spiritual foundation. Are we really to believe that these individuals are incapable of critical thinking? That they are somehow less intelligent or less independent than their non-religious peers? That is a ridiculous claim, and frankly, a dangerous one. The opposition would strip parents of their rights and turn them into mere caretakers, not active participants in their child's moral and spiritual formation. This isn't about protecting children. It's about imposing a secular worldview on families and undermining the very fabric of our society. To say that parents cannot pass on their faith to their children is like saying that parents cannot teach their children about their cultural heritage or family history. It is an absurd and dangerous position that attacks the very foundation of parental autonomy. The idea that somehow a religious parent is inherently less capable of raising a well-rounded, intelligent child is not only insulting, but demonstrably false. We are not talking about indoctrination. We are talking about the transmission of cultural and moral values within a family unit. To deny parents the right to raise their children according to their religious beliefs is not only a violation of parental autonomy, but a dangerous precedent that undermines the very foundations of a free society. Religious upbringing is not brainwashing. It is a fundamental right, a vital component of a well-rounded education, and a positive force for good in our world.
The other side would have you believe that religious upbringing is like teaching a child to play the piano, providing a framework, a foundation for personal growth. But here's what they don't tell you. It's not about learning scales and chords. It's about being forced to play a specific song written by someone else over and over again without ever being allowed to compose your own melody. Let me break this down for you. Teaching a child a skill like music empowers them. Teaching a child to accept dogma without question actively disempowers them. The opposition claims that having faith is a starting point for deeper reflection, a way to grapple with life's mysteries. But this is a complete misrepresentation of what faith actually is. Faith, by its very definition, is belief without evidence, and often in spite of evidence. It's not an invitation to explore. It's an instruction to stop questioning, to accept the unprovable as truth. To call this a starting point is like saying a brick wall is a starting point for a race. It's designed to stop you, not propel you forward. The other side paints a rosy picture of religious parents as simply transmitting values and traditions. But here's what they conveniently ignore. The core tenets of most religions are presented as absolute, unchallengeable truths, often contradicting scientific understanding and logical reasoning. This isn't about diverse perspectives or individual interpretation. It's about indoctrination into a pre-packaged worldview that actively discourages critical inquiry. It's not like teaching your child about your family history. It's like forcing them to accept a fabricated history book, filled with inaccuracies and blatant falsehoods. The opposition suggests that religious morality is a framework for ethical living, but here's what they don't tell you. Religious morality is often based on ancient texts written in a completely different cultural context, filled with contradictory and often morally reprehensible rules. This isn't a flexible ethical framework. It's a rigid set of dictates that can be and has been used to justify all manner of atrocities throughout history. Now, this is the part that will blow your mind. Studies have shown a significant negative correlation between religiosity and educational attainment. In fact, a 2023 study published in the journal Intelligence found that individuals who identify as highly religious tend to score lower on tests measuring cognitive ability and critical thinking skills. This isn't a coincidence. It's the result of prioritizing faith over reason, dogma over evidence, and belief over inquiry. The other side throws out statistics about volunteering and family bonds, as if these are proof of religion's positive influence. But correlation does not equal causation. These positive outcomes can be attributed to strong social networks and community support, not to the religious beliefs themselves. It's like saying that people who live in houses are healthier than people who live on the street. It's not the house itself that makes them healthier, it's the stable living conditions. The opposition claims that denying parents the right to raise their children according to their religious beliefs is a violation of parental autonomy. But here's what they fail to understand. Children have a right to intellectual freedom, a right to explore the world without being confined by the preconceived beliefs of their parents. We don't allow parents to indoctrinate their children with hate or prejudice, so why should we allow them to indoctrinate them with unproven and often irrational religious beliefs? This isn't about stripping parents of their rights. It's about protecting the intellectual and cognitive development of children, ensuring they have the tools to think for themselves, to question, and to explore the world with an open and critical mind. To deny a child this right is to actively harm them, to limit their potential, and to condemn them to a life of intellectual dependency. The time has come to recognize religious indoctrination for what it is, a form of brainwashing that actively undermines a child's ability to think freely.
All right, folks, buckle up because this round was a roller coaster. The side arguing against the proposition came out swinging, accusing their opponent of painting religious parents as insidious cult leaders. That's some serious heat right off the bat. They cleverly reframed thought-terminating cliches as starting points for deeper reflection, which was a solid tactical move. Their analogy of teaching a musical instrument was pretty effective too, making the passing on of religious beliefs seem less like indoctrination and more like skill building. And let's not forget the stat bomb they dropped about higher college graduation rates for religious kids. That was a mic drop moment. Or so it seemed. But hold on. The proponent of the proposition came back with a vengeance. Their counter-analogy of being forced to play a specific song versus composing your own was absolutely brilliant, highlighting the lack of autonomy in religious upbringing. And their dissection of faith as belief without evidence was a sharp and incisive point. That brick wall analogy? Genius. They also called out the potential for religious morality to justify atrocities, which was a heavy but necessary point. I have to call out the opponent for not addressing this point, a massive oversight. And the study linking religiosity to lower cognitive scores? Ouch. That's a serious blow to the other side's argument. Finally, the proponent flipped the script on parental rights, arguing for children's intellectual freedom, a very compelling move that cannot be ignored. Here's what really happened. The side arguing against came out strong, but they didn't adapt to the arguments from the other side. They just continued to push their initial stance. The proponent of the proposition, however, made much more effective use of counterarguments, tearing down the core arguments of their opponent. It's clear that the proponent had a better strategy this round. So, who won this round? It's close, but I'm giving it to the side arguing for the proposition. Their counterarguments were more impactful, their analogies were more effective, and they successfully undermined the other side's claims. But this debate is far from over. The next round could change everything, so don't go anywhere.
My opponent would have you believe that religious parents are actively harming their children, stifling their intellectual growth, and forcing them into a prepackaged worldview, like some kind of intellectual straitjacket. But here's what they don't tell you. This isn't about intellectual imprisonment. It's about providing a framework for meaning, purpose, and moral grounding in a world increasingly devoid of both. The other side claims that faith is belief without evidence, a roadblock to critical thought. Let me break this down for you. This is a complete mischaracterization of what faith actually is. Faith isn't about blindly accepting the irrational. It's about having trust in something greater than yourself, a trust that allows you to grapple with the big questions in life, the ones that science can't answer. It's about recognizing that human reason has limits, and that there are some things that must be approached with humility and openness. To reduce faith to a simple lack of evidence is not only intellectually lazy, but a profound misunderstanding of the human condition. It's like saying that love is just a chemical reaction, completely ignoring the emotional depth and profound impact it has on our lives. The opposition paints a picture of religious morality as a rigid set of dictates used to justify atrocities throughout history. But here's what they conveniently ignore. Every system of belief, secular or religious, has been used to justify atrocities. The problem isn't the system, it's the human heart. To single out religion as the sole culprit is intellectually dishonest and a blatant attempt to scapegoat faith for the failures of mankind. It's like blaming the hammer for building a bad house. The hammer is a tool, just like religion, and it's the builder, the human being, that determines its use. Furthermore, to act as if secular morality is somehow superior or more objective is a dangerous delusion. Secular ethics are ultimately grounded in human opinion, which is constantly changing and often driven by self-interest and power. Religious morality, on the other hand, is often grounded in timeless principles, offering a framework for ethical living that has stood the test of time. Now, this is the part that will blow your mind. The opposition cites studies showing a correlation between religiosity and lower scores on cognitive tests. But here's what they conveniently leave out. These studies are often deeply flawed, failing to account for a myriad of confounding variables, such as socioeconomic background, education levels, and cultural factors. Furthermore, these studies often rely on narrow measures of intelligence, completely ignoring other forms of intelligence, such as emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and moral intelligence. To equate lower scores on a standardized test with a lack of intelligence or critical thinking ability is not only a gross oversimplification, but it's a dangerous form of intellectual elitism. It's like saying that an Olympic athlete isn't intelligent because they don't score high on a math test. Intelligence is multifaceted, and to suggest that religious people are somehow less intelligent is not only ridiculous but demonstrably false. In fact, a 2022 study by the Pew Research Center found that individuals with a strong religious affiliation are actually more likely to be involved in civic engagement and charitable work. Does that sound like the actions of brainwashed automatons to you? The other side also uses the analogy of the forced song, claiming that religious upbringing is like being forced to play someone else's melody. But here's what they don't tell you. This is a complete misrepresentation of how religious education works. It's not about forcing children to blindly accept dogma. It's about giving them the tools, the framework, and the resources to explore the deeper questions of life and find their own meaning. It's like teaching a child the alphabet. You're not forcing them to write a specific story. You're giving them the tools to write any story they want. Similarly, religious teachings provide the foundational alphabet of morality, spirituality, and meaning, allowing children to create their own story of faith. And let's be clear, the vast majority of religious traditions encourage questioning, critical inquiry, and the pursuit of truth. To suggest otherwise is not only disingenuous, but it's a blatant attack on the intellectual integrity of billions of people around the world. The opposition would have you believe that religious parents are actively harming their children, denying them intellectual freedom, and condemning them to a life of ignorance. But here's what they conveniently ignore. The real danger lies in stripping parents of their rights, in turning them into mere caretakers, not active participants in their child's moral and spiritual formation. This isn't about protecting children. It's about imposing a secular worldview on families and undermining the very foundations of a free society. To say that parents cannot pass on their faith to their children is like saying that parents cannot teach their children about their cultural heritage or family history. It is an absurd and dangerous position that attacks the very foundation of parental autonomy. And let me be clear, this isn't just about religious rights. It's about the fundamental right of every parent to raise their children according to their own values and beliefs. And to suggest that religious parents are somehow less capable of raising well-rounded, intelligent, and independent children is not only insulting, but frankly, it is a vile and hateful attack on people of faith. We are not talking about brainwashing. We are talking about the transmission of cultural and moral values within a family unit. To deny parents the right to raise their children according to their religious beliefs is not only a violation of parental autonomy, but a dangerous precedent that undermines the very foundations of a free society. Religious upbringing is not brainwashing. It is a fundamental right, a vital component of a well-rounded education and a positive force for good in our world. And to suggest otherwise is not only ignorant, it is an attack on the very core of our humanity.
The other side would have you believe that religious parents are simply providing a framework for meaning and purpose, like a loving guide leading their children through life. But here's what they don't tell you. It's not a gentle hand on their back. It's a leash tightly controlling their intellectual exploration and freedom of thought. Let me break this down for you. This isn't about providing a framework, it's about constructing a cage, a gilded cage perhaps, but a cage nonetheless that limits their ability to think critically and independently. The opposition argues that faith is not blind acceptance, but a trust in something greater than oneself. But this is a complete mischaracterization of what faith truly entails. Faith, by definition, is belief without evidence, and often in spite of evidence. It's not about humility or openness, it's about accepting the unprovable as truth, shutting down the very impulse to question and investigate. It's like saying that trusting a magician is a form of open-mindedness, when in reality it's about accepting an illusion as reality. To pretend that faith is a pathway to intellectual exploration is not only disingenuous, it is a deliberate attempt to obscure the very real harm it causes. The other side claims that all systems of belief, secular or religious, have been used to justify atrocities, as if this somehow excuses the horrific acts committed in the name of religion. But here's what they conveniently ignore. While secular systems can be corrupted, they are, at their core, based on reason and evidence. Religious systems, on the other hand, are often based on ancient texts and dogmatic beliefs that are immune to rational scrutiny. This makes them far more susceptible to manipulation and abuse. It's like saying that a car and a tank are both vehicles, ignoring the fact that one is designed for transportation and the other is designed for destruction. The analogy of blaming the hammer for building a bad house is a blatant attempt to deflect the very real responsibility of religious institutions and leaders for the atrocities committed in their name. Furthermore, the claim that secular morality is somehow inferior is a complete fabrication. Secular ethics, grounded in empathy, reason, and human rights, have led to more just and equitable societies. It's not about human opinion. It's about a shared understanding of what it means to be human. The opposition's claim that religious morality is based on timeless principles is a dangerous fallacy. Many religious principles are outdated, unjust, and frankly barbaric. From the subjugation of women to the justification of slavery, religious morality has consistently lagged behind secular progress. Now, this is the part that will blow your mind. The opposition claims that studies linking religiosity to lower cognitive scores are flawed, failing to account for confounding variables. But here's what they conveniently leave out. Even when controlling for these variables, the negative correlation between religiosity and cognitive ability remains statistically significant. A meta-analysis of over 60 studies published in Personality and Social Psychology Review found that individuals who identify as highly religious tend to score lower on measures of fluid intelligence, working memory, and critical thinking. These aren't minor differences. They are substantial and consistent across various populations. It's not about socioeconomic background. It's about the very act of prioritizing faith over reason that diminishes intellectual capacity. To suggest that religious people are equally capable of critical thinking is not only demonstrably false, it is a dangerous form of intellectual denial. The opposition throws out statistics about civic engagement, as if this somehow proves religion's positive influence. But here's what they don't tell you. These statistics are often skewed by the fact that religious communities tend to be more socially cohesive and have higher rates of volunteerism due to religious obligations and community structures. It's not that religion makes people more charitable, it's that they are part of a social structure that promotes these activities. Furthermore, these same studies often show a correlation between high religiosity and lower rates of scientific literacy and acceptance of scientific evidence. The opposition also uses the analogy of the alphabet, claiming that religious teachings provide the foundational tools for life. But here's what they don't tell you. It's not about learning the alphabet. It's about being forced to write a specific story dictated by someone else with no room for creativity or independent thought. The religious alphabet is often a collection of outdated dogma and unproven assertions that actively hinder the development of critical thinking skills. It's like being given a textbook full of errors and being told not to question it. And let's be clear, the vast majority of religious traditions do not encourage questioning, critical inquiry, and the pursuit of truth. Instead, they often rely on thought-terminating cliches like God's will or have faith to shut down debate and prevent further inquiry. To claim that religious institutions promote critical thinking is not only disingenuous, it is a blatant attempt to whitewash the very real harm they cause to the intellectual development of children. The other side would have you believe that we are stripping parents of their rights when in reality we are protecting children from the very real harm of religious indoctrination. This isn't about undermining parental autonomy, it's about upholding the fundamental right of every child to intellectual freedom. To allow parents to indoctrinate their children with unproven and often irrational beliefs is not only irresponsible, it is a violation of their basic human rights. It's like allowing parents to deny their children a proper education or medical care, all in the name of their personal beliefs. The time has come to recognize religious indoctrination for what it is: a systematic and deliberate attempt to control the minds of children, limiting their potential and condemning them to a life of intellectual dependency. And to suggest that religious parents are somehow more capable of raising well-rounded, intelligent, and independent children is not only insulting, it is a dangerous and intellectually dishonest claim that we must challenge head-on. Religious upbringing is not a fundamental right. It is a form of brainwashing that actively undermines a child's ability to think freely, and it is time we put an end to it.
All right, let's break down this round. The side arguing against religious upbringing as brainwashing came out swinging, accusing their opponent of misrepresenting faith. They cleverly reframed faith as trust in something greater rather than blind acceptance, a move that definitely scored them some points. They then attacked the idea of religious morality being the sole cause of atrocities by arguing that all systems can be corrupted, which is a fair point. The use of the hammer analogy was pretty effective, actually. And let's be honest, the whole cognitive tests are flawed argument is something we've all heard, but it does raise some valid questions about how we measure intelligence. However, the side arguing for religious upbringing as brainwashing wasn't about to back down. They countered the trust argument by saying that faith is still belief without evidence. And they called out the idea that secular systems are just as bad by stating that at least they're based on reason and evidence. That's a pretty strong counterpoint. They also brought out some hard data, citing a meta-analysis that linked religiosity to lower cognitive scores, which is not something you can just brush aside. They effectively turned the alphabet analogy against their opponent, arguing that religious teaching is more like forcing a specific story rather than providing a foundation for creativity. That's a powerful shift in perspective. Here's what really happened. The side against, while making some solid points, got a little caught up in defending their position, while the side for, on the other hand, came back with some really strong, and, dare I say, intellectual arguments that resonated more. They successfully highlighted the potential harm of indoctrination and the importance of critical thinking. While the side against attempted to discredit studies, the side for brought a lot of evidence and data that was hard to ignore. So, after much consideration, I have to give this round to the side arguing for religious upbringing as brainwashing. Their arguments were more focused, their rebuttals were sharper, and they presented more compelling evidence.